Please, you must listen to me. I beg you, this is madness. Why are you so unmoved? I cannot bear this silence.
Coachman, take me home. My voice cracked through the cold night air like a whip. The horses did not stop. The carriage did not slow. And the man sitting across from me in the darkness did not even flinch. I lunged for the door handle. Locked. I struck it with my palm. Still locked. I said, "Take me home." I repeated, louder this time, my breath coming fast, the lantern light swaying wildly between us as the wheels thundered over cobblestones. Then I heard it. That sound. Low, quiet, and absolutely maddening. He was smirking. The Duke of Coachman sat with one arm resting along the window ledge, his dark eyes fixed on me like I was the most extraordinary thing he had encountered in all his years of power and title and cold indifference. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply watched me struggle with that locked door and said nothing at all. "You planned this," I whispered, my voice dropping dangerously low. He tilted his head, just slightly. "Did I?" he said at last. "I was Miss Adeline Crest, daughter of a disgraced baron, a woman who had already lost everything once. I had not survived ruin and shame and a merciless London season just to be trapped inside a duke's carriage at midnight with nowhere to run. But the door was locked, and he held the key. Now tell me, what would you have done in that carriage? Drop your answer below, and if this story already has you gripped, hit subscribe because we are just getting started.
Driver, stop this carriage at once! You cannot keep me here! Release me! Help! Someone please help me! I beg of you, turn back now!
Coachman, take me home. The words tore out of my throat before I could stop them, raw and desperate, swallowed almost immediately by the roar of hooves and the violent rattling of wheels against wet cobblestone. The lantern inside the carriage swung left, then right, casting wild shadows across the walls, across my hands, across his face. His face. I had made a terrible mistake getting into this carriage. It had all happened so fast. The Hargrove ball had ended in disaster, as most things in my life tended to do. Lady Portsmouth had announced, in front of half of London's finest, that my father's debts had finally caught up with our family name. She had said it sweetly, the way cruel women always do, with a smile and a glass of champagne raised in mock celebration. The room had gone quiet. Every eye had turned to me, and I, Miss Adeline Crest, daughter of the late Baron Crest of Dunhollow, had done the only dignified thing available to me. I had walked out, head high, back straight, hands steady, though my heart was in pieces on that ballroom floor. I had stepped into the cold night air and called for a carriage. Any carriage. I had not looked properly. I had not thought clearly. I had simply climbed in, pulled the door shut behind me, and said those words. "Coachman, take me home." And then the door across from me had opened, and he had stepped in. The Duke of Coachman did not ask permission. Men like him never did. He simply folded himself into the seat opposite mine with the ease of a man who believed every room, every carriage, every space in England belonged to him by birthright. He had removed one glove, then the other, and set them on his knee without a word. I had stared at him. "This is my carriage," I said. "No," he replied without looking up. "It is mine." I had opened my mouth, closed it, looked out the window at the Hargrove house still glowing behind us, already growing smaller, already too far to walk back to in the dark. "Then I will get out," I said firmly. "We are moving," he pointed out. "Then stop the carriage." He had looked at me then, for the first time, fully and without apology. His eyes were dark, the kind of dark that had no warmth in it, or perhaps too much warmth buried so deeply it had forgotten how to surface. His jaw was sharp. His expression was unreadable. He was perhaps 30, perhaps older. It was impossible to tell with men who had never known a single day of real suffering. "Coachman, take me home," I said again, louder, directing my voice upward toward the driver's box. The carriage did not slow. I turned back to the Duke with fury rising hot in my chest. "Your driver is ignoring me." "My driver follows my instructions," he said simply. "And what instructions did you give him?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, almost to himself, he said, "To drive." I reached across and tried the door handle. It turned but did not open. I tried again, harder, my fingers white against the iron. Still nothing. I looked at him. He looked back at me. And there, just at the corner of his mouth, was the beginning of something that made my blood boil. A smirk. "You locked it," I said, the words coming out very quiet and very dangerous. He said nothing. Duke of Caldverne. I spoke his full title deliberately, the way one speaks to a man who needs reminding that titles are not shields. "You will unlock this door, you will stop this carriage, and you will allow me to leave." He tilted his head slightly to the right, as though my demands were mildly interesting to him, the way a puzzle might be interesting, something to observe rather than obey. "You were at the Hargrove ball," he said. "It was not a question." "That is none of your concern," I said. "Lady Portsmouth was rather vicious tonight," he continued, as though I had not spoken. "Even by her own standards." Something sharp moved through my chest. I did not want him to speak about that. Not him. Not anyone. Certainly not a man who had probably stood in that ballroom and watched my humiliation the same way everyone else had, with mild curiosity and no intention of intervening. "Stop the carriage," I said again, my voice cracking just slightly at the edge. He heard it. I saw something shift in his expression, something brief and almost imperceptible, but it was there. His eyes moved over my face, not with cruelty, but with a kind of careful attention that unsettled me more than cruelty would have. "Where do you live?" he asked. "That is not your business." "It is, if I am to take you there." "I did not ask you to take me anywhere. I asked you to stop so I can find my own way." "It is past midnight," he said. "You are a woman alone on a London street with no chaperone and no footman. That is not a situation I will contribute to." I laughed, and it came out brittle and humorless. "How noble of you! And locking a woman inside your carriage against her will is somehow the more honorable choice?" He did not answer that. The carriage hit a rough patch of road and lurched sideways. I grabbed the edge of my seat. The lantern swung again, and for one suspended moment the light caught him differently, and I saw something I had not noticed before. A long, thin scar running from just below his left ear to the edge of his jaw. Old, silvered with time, the kind of mark left not by accident, but by intent. I looked away quickly. "Dunhollow," I said at last, because I was tired and the streets were dark, and I had already lost too much pride tonight to lose my safety as well. "The Crest House on Dunhollow Lane." He leaned forward and knocked twice on the roof of the carriage. A moment later, the driver's voice came down. "Your Grace?" "Dunhollow Lane," the Duke said. "Yes, Your Grace." And just like that, the carriage changed direction. I sat back and pressed my spine against the seat and stared at the small oval window and tried very hard not to look at him again. Outside, London rolled past in fragments. A lit tavern window, a flower seller's abandoned cart, a cat crossing the road with the slow dignity of something that belonged to no one. I envied that cat enormously. "You should not have been alone tonight," he said suddenly. "I was not alone. I was at a ball surrounded by 300 people." "That is not what I mean." I turned to look at him despite myself. He was watching the window now, his profile sharp and still against the darkness outside. "Then what do you mean?" I asked. He did not answer immediately, When he did, his voice was quieter than before, as though the words cost him something to say. "No one stood beside you," he said. When Portsmouth spoke, no one moved. The silence that followed was enormous. I had promised myself in the carriage, in the cold and the dark and the humiliation of the night, that I would not cry. I had cried enough in private. I would not do it in front of a stranger, and certainly not in front of a duke who had locked me inside his carriage and looked at me like I was a puzzle he had not yet decided whether to solve. So I did not cry. I simply said, "No." No one did. And I looked back out the window. The carriage rolled on through the dark London streets, and neither of us spoke again for a long time, and the silence between us was somehow the most honest conversation I had had all evening. The carriage stopped on Dunhollow Lane, and I did not wait for a footman. I reached for the door, and this time it opened. He had unlocked it somewhere along the way without a word, without ceremony, as though it had never been locked at all. I stepped out into the cold night air and turned only briefly to look back at him. He was watching me from inside the carriage, his face half lit by the swinging lantern, his expression giving away nothing. "Thank you," I said stiffly, because my mother had raised me with manners even when manners felt like surrender. He inclined his head. Just barely. Just enough. I turned and walked to my front door without looking back again. Inside, the house was quiet in the way that only houses with too many empty rooms could be. The hallway candles had burned low. Our housekeeper, old Mrs. Petch, was asleep in her chair by the kitchen door, her cap slightly askew, her breathing slow and steady. I did not wake her. I moved past her gently, climbed the stairs, and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. My hands were still shaking. I told myself it was the cold. I told myself it was the evening, the ball. Lady Portsmouth's voice ringing bright and merciless in that chandelier-lit room. I told myself it had nothing to do with the Duke of Caldvern and his locked door and his terrible, patient smirk and the way he had said, "No one stood beside you," as though it was a fact that troubled him. Men like him were not troubled by things like that. Men like him caused things like that. I lay back on my bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around me, old wood and old memories, and the distant sound of a carriage moving away down the lane, its wheels loud in the quiet night, growing fainter and fainter until there was nothing left but silence. I did not sleep well. The morning came gray and indifferent, the way London mornings often did in October. I dressed without help, since we had let 2 of our 3 maids go the previous month, and came downstairs to find a letter already waiting on the hall table. Mrs. Petch was awake now, standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms folded and her expression arranged in the particular way it arranged itself when something had happened that she did not fully approve of. "Arrived early," she said, nodding at the letter. "Boy brought it on foot. Smart-looking boy, too. Good coat." I picked up the letter. The seal was dark wax, pressed with a crest I did not immediately recognize. An eagle with its wings folded, not spread. Watching, not flying. I broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was precise and unhurried, the kind of hand that had been trained from childhood to leave no doubt about its meaning. It read, "Miss Crest, the matter of your father's debts, which Lady Portsmouth so generously publicized last evening, is not as settled as she implied. There are options that have not yet been explored. If you are willing to discuss them, I will call at 11. If you are not, I will not call again. Either way, the choice is entirely yours." It was signed, simply, Caldvern. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the table and went to stand at the kitchen window and looked out at the small walled garden where nothing was growing anymore because we had not had the money or the help to tend it properly since father died. "Well," said Mrs. Petch. "The Duke of Caldvern is coming at 11, I said. Mrs. Petch was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I will make proper tea." Which meant she thought I should let him in. I thought about the carriage, the locked door, the smirk, the way he had watched me like he was cataloging every detail of my face and storing it somewhere for later use. I thought about the scar along his jaw and the way he had said no one stood beside you as though it had mattered to him. This stranger, this duke, who had no reason whatsoever to concern himself with the social destruction of an obscure baron's daughter. I thought about my father's debts, £40,000, a number so large it had stopped feeling real months ago and had simply become the shape of the future, gray and closed and going nowhere. "Fine," I said. "Make the tea." He arrived at 11 precisely, not a minute before, not a minute after, which told me something about him, though I could not yet decide what. Mrs. Petch showed him into the front sitting room, which I had spent the previous hour making look less desperate than it was, moving the cracked vase to the windowsill where the light softened it, folding the fraying cushion cover beneath the good one. He walked in and looked around the room once, quickly, and I could tell by the way he did it that he saw everything and said nothing about any of it. He was dressed plainly for a duke, dark coat, no excessive embellishment, no jeweled pins or powdered affectation. Just clean, precise, expensive cloth, and that same unhurried way of moving through a space that I had noticed in the carriage. "Miss Crest," he said. "Duke of Caldvern," I replied. We stood looking at each other across the small sitting room for a moment that lasted slightly longer than courtesy required. "Sit down, please," I said, because my mother's voice was still somewhere inside me, arranging things properly even when nothing was proper. He sat. I sat across from him. Mrs. Petch appeared with tea, set it down with great dignity, and disappeared, though I was entirely certain she remained directly on the other side of the door. "You mentioned options," I said, not wanting to waste time on pleasantries that neither of us meant. "Regarding my father's debts." "Yes," he said. "What options?" He lifted his tea, looked at it briefly, set it back down. "Your father borrowed heavily from 3 creditors before his death," he said. "2 of those creditors sold their notes to a third party 6 weeks ago." I felt something cold move through me. "What third party?" "Me," he said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. I stared at him. "You purchased my father's debts," I said slowly. 2/3 of them, yes. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man with nothing to say, but the quiet of a man choosing carefully what to say first. "Because the remaining creditor, a man named Drutch, has made it known that he intends to seize this house and everything in it before the month is out," he said. "And I thought it more useful to own the debt than to watch someone else act on it." My hands were folded in my lap. I made certain they did not tighten. "And now that you own it," I said carefully, "what do you intend to do with it?" He looked at me directly. Those dark, unhurried eyes. "That depends entirely on you," he said. There was a sound from behind the sitting room door. Very small. Almost imperceptible. Mrs. Petch, leaning slightly closer. "I am not a woman who responds well to conditions," I said. "I am not a man who offers them lightly," he replied. "Then speak plainly." He was quiet for one more beat, the kind of pause that a man takes not because he is uncertain, but because he wants the next thing he says to land correctly. "I have a younger sister," he said. "Lady Dresswin Caldvern. She is 19 and comes out this season. She is clever, somewhat headstrong, and entirely uninterested in the sort of guidance our aunt, Lady Breckthorne, keeps attempting to give her. He paused. I need someone with sense to accompany her. Not as a servant, as a companion. Someone who understands society well enough to help her navigate it without either destroying her chances or destroying herself in the process. I looked at him for a long moment. You want me, I said flatly, to be your sister's companion. I want to offer you a position that pays your household expenses for the season and settles the debt notes I hold against your name, he said. At the end of the season, those notes will be destroyed. Permanently. Regardless of the outcome of Lady Dresswin's introduction to society. The silence in the room was very loud. Outside, a cart rattled past on Dunhollow Lane. A dog barked twice and stopped. The sitting room clock ticked with the steady indifference of something that had no opinions about any of this. And Drutch? I said. The remaining creditor? I will handle Drutch, he said. That is not an answer. It is the only one I will give you on that matter. I looked out the window, at the cracked vase, at the pale October light falling across the fraying rug that had been my mother's, that I had kept because it was one of the last things left that still smelled faintly, impossibly, of her. Then I looked back at him. Why me? I asked. You could hire anyone. You could ask any family in London to send a sensible daughter to accompany your sister. Why come to me? He picked up his tea. This time, he drank it. Set the cup down with the kind of deliberateness that suggested he was in no hurry to perform anything, including discomfort. Because, he said, you walked out of that ballroom last night with your head high and your hands steady, after the worst kind of public humiliation, in front of 300 people who did nothing, and not one of them could have done it with the same dignity. I said nothing. He stood. Think about it, he said. I will need your answer by tomorrow morning. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame, and turned back to look at me one final time. And Miss Crest? He added quietly. Lock your own doors tonight. Drutch does not keep gentlemanly hours. Then he was gone. I sat alone in the sitting room for a very long time, listening to the clock tick, looking at my mother's rug, and thinking about a man who purchased debts and locked carriage doors and watched women walk out of ballrooms and apparently remembered every detail of what he saw. This was a trap. I was almost certain of it. The question was whether I was desperate enough to walk into it anyway. And the terrible truth, sitting quiet and heavy in my chest, was that I already knew the answer. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark listening to the house breathe around me, every creak of the floorboards sounding like footsteps, every rattle of the window frame sounding like a threat. Drutch does not keep gentlemanly hours. The Duke's words sat in my chest like a cold stone, and I pulled my blanket tighter and stared at the ceiling and thought about a man I had never met who held the last third of my father's debt and apparently had no intention of being patient about it. At 2:30 in the morning, I heard it. A sound. Low and deliberate, coming from below. Not the house settling, not the wind. Something else. The soft, careful sound of someone who did not want to be heard. I was out of my bed before I had fully decided to move. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and took the small candle from my nightstand and moved to the top of the stairs. Below, the hall was dark. Mrs. Petch's room was at the back of the house. She would not hear anything from there. I stood very still and listened. The sound came again, from the direction of my father's old study. I went down the stairs one at a time, pressing my feet to the edge of each step where the wood was less likely to complain. I reached the bottom, crossed the hall, pressed my palm flat against the study door. It was warm. Someone had been in this room recently, long enough to bring warmth to a door that was always cold. I pushed it open. The window was unlatched. The curtain moved slightly in the night air. On my father's desk, 3 of the drawers had been pulled open and rifled through. Papers scattered. The small locked box where father had kept his correspondence forced open and emptied. I stood in the doorway holding my candle and feeling something shift permanently inside me. This was not a warning. This was a message. Someone had come into my home, in the dark, while I slept, and gone through every private paper my father had ever owned, and whatever they had been looking for, I did not know. But the fact that they had come at all told me that the Duke of Coachman had not been speaking idly when he told me to lock my doors. I crossed to the window and looked out into the lane. Nothing. Only darkness and the distant glow of a street lamp at the far end of the road and the shadow of a cat moving along the top of the garden wall. But on the windowsill, caught beneath the latch, was a small folded card. I picked it up, opened it. 3 words, written in a hasty and unsteady hand. Pay or leave. I closed the card, set it down, stood in the cold study surrounded by my father's scattered papers, and breathed very carefully through the fear that was trying very hard to become panicked. Then I went back upstairs, sat at my writing desk, and wrote a single line on a clean sheet of paper. I accept your offer. Miss O. Crest. I sealed it, addressed it to the Duke of Coachman, and at first light, I sent it with the baker's boy who came each morning for Mrs. Petch's order, because I had no footman and no proper messenger, and pride, at a certain point, simply had to step aside for survival. The reply came within the hour. Good. My carriage will collect you at noon. Bring whatever you need for the season. C. I stared at that single initial for a moment longer than I should have. Then I told Mrs. Petch to start packing. She did not ask questions. She simply pressed her lips together in a way that meant she had several opinions she was choosing not to voice, and went upstairs to begin folding things. At 10:30, while I was in my room deciding what little I had that was still worth bringing, I heard the front door. Not a knock. A knock, and then an immediate opening, as though whoever was on the other side had decided the formality of waiting was beneath them. I came to the top of the stairs and looked down. A man I had never seen before was standing in my hallway. He was broad and pale, with a heavy coat that had seen better years, and a way of standing that took up more space than it needed to. He had small eyes set close together above a wide, flat nose, and he was looking around my hallway with the casual possessiveness of someone tallying up what things were worth. Miss Crest, he said, without looking up at me, still surveying the hallway. You are in my home, I said from the top of the stairs, my voice very steady, without invitation. He looked up then. His small eyes moved over me with the same appraising quality he had given the hallway. Drutch, he said, simply, as though the name was enough, as though it explained and excused everything. I know who you are, I said. Then you know why I am here. Get out of my house. He smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who had never once been made to feel the consequence of his own behavior and had long since stopped expecting any. You have until the end of the week, he said. After that, this house and all its contents become mine, including that rug in the sitting room. Pretty thing. Shame it's so worn. He had seen the rug. He had been inside my sitting room. He had been inside my house before today, and not last night for the first time. The thought moved through me cold and clarifying. You have until the count of 5 to leave through that door, I said, or I will scream loud enough to bring every neighbor on this lane to their windows, and I will tell each one of them exactly who you are and what you have come here to do. And then we will see how your other debtors feel about a man whose name is known for breaking into the homes of young women in the night. Something moved across his face. Briefly. Just a flicker of something recalculating. Then he settled his coat on his shoulders, gave the hallway one last sweeping look, and walked back through the front door without another word. I gripped the banister until I heard the door close. Then I sat down on the top step and put my face in my hands and shook for exactly 1 minute. After that, I stood up and went back to packing. At noon, the Duke's carriage arrived. It was not the same carriage as the night of the Hargrove ball. This one was larger, with 2 footmen on the rear board and a driver who kept his eyes forward and his expression professional. One of the footmen came to the door and took my 2 trunks without a word. Mrs. Petch stood in the doorway watching with her arms folded and her eyes bright in a way that I was choosing not to examine too closely. "I will send money for the household by the end of the week," I told her. "Never mind about that," she said, which meant she minded very much, but was too proud to say so. "Lock every window," I said. "Everyone. And if a man named Drutch comes to this door again, you do not open it. Not for any reason." She nodded. Her jaw was set in the way it set itself when she was frightened but refusing to be. I got into the carriage. The Duke of Caldvern was not inside it this time. There was, however, a young woman. She was sitting with her feet tucked up beneath her on the seat, which was not how young ladies were supposed to sit, reading a small leather-bound book that she did not lower when I got in. She had dark hair escaping from its pins in several directions, sharp cheekbones, and the same quality of stillness I had noticed in her brother, except that on her, it looked less like control and more like concentration. She lowered the book an inch and looked at me over the top of it. "You are Miss Crest," she said. "I am," I said. "I am Dresswin," she said. "My brother says you are sensible." "That is kind of him." "He did not mean it kindly," she said, returning to her book. "He meant it practically. He means most things practically." I looked at her for a moment. Then I settled back in my seat and looked out the window as the carriage began to move, carrying me away from Dunhollow Lane and the worn rug, and the rifled study, and the life that had been shrinking around me for the past 2 years. "What are you reading?" I asked. She turned the book so I could see the spine. It was a treatise on land inheritance law. "I like to know things," she said, as though this required no further explanation. I decided at that moment that I liked Lady Dresswin Caldvern considerably. The carriage rolled on through London toward the Duke's townhouse at Belcroft Square, and I sat across from a girl who read inheritance law for pleasure and thought about everything that had happened in the past 24 hours and tried very hard to feel prepared for whatever came next. I did not entirely succeed. Caldvern House at Belcroft Square was not what I expected. I had imagined something cold and grand and deliberately intimidating, the kind of house that announced its owner's importance before you had even crossed the threshold. What I found instead was a house that was grand. Yes, undeniably, with high ceilings and polished floors and more rooms than any reasonable number of people could ever need. But it was also, somehow, inhabited. Books left open on side tables, a half-finished chessboard in the morning room, flowers in the entrance hall that someone had actually chosen with care, rather than simply instructed a servant to arrange. The housekeeper, a tall and precise woman named Mrs. Dorval, met me at the door and showed me to my rooms with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been managing a large house for a very long time and had strong opinions about how things should be done. My rooms were on the second floor, comfortable and well-appointed, overlooking the square's small central garden, where the October trees were stripping themselves bare in the wind. I stood at the window and watched the leaves fall and tried to understand what I had walked into. "Dinner is at 7, Mrs. Dorval said from the doorway. "His Grace dines at 7 precisely and does not appreciate lateness. Lady Dresswin dines when she remembers to, which is a difficulty we are all working to address." "I will be on time," I said. "Good," she said, with a weight of relief that suggested this was not something she took for granted. The Duke was at dinner when I arrived in the dining room at 2 minutes to 7. He was already seated, reading a document that he set aside when I entered, with the unhurried manner of a man who read at dinner tables because the alternative was silence, and silence apparently did not bother him. Dresswin arrived at 12 minutes past 7 with a book under her arm and her hair re-pinned, but still losing the battle. She sat down, opened the book beside her plate, caught her brother's eye, and closed it again with a small sound of protest. "Miss Crest," the Duke said, as the first course was served, "you will begin accompanying Dresswin to her morning calls from tomorrow." "Yes," I said. "There is a fitting at Madame Ronval's on Thursday for her presentation gown. You will attend that as well." "Yes. And Lady Breckthorne, our aunt, is expected on Friday." He paused, with the particular pause of a man selecting his words carefully. "She will have opinions." "About me?" I asked. "About everything," said Dresswin cheerfully, reaching for her bread roll. She once had opinions about the angle of a window, for 3 consecutive visits. "She means well," the Duke said, in the tone of a man who had said this many times and believed it less each time. The dinner continued in this manner, practical and strangely comfortable, and I began to understand that this household ran on a kind of ordered efficiency that the Duke had clearly constructed deliberately, perhaps because without it, things would have been considerably more chaotic. Dresswin was a force. That much was apparent. Quick and sharp and entirely without the performed softness that most young women of her station spent years perfecting. She said what she thought. She asked what she wanted to know. And she looked at me across the dinner table with a frank curiosity that reminded me, painfully, of myself at 19, before 2 years of slow ruin had sanded the edges off things. After dinner, the Duke asked me to remain in the sitting room. Dresswin disappeared with her book, and we were alone. He stood at the fireplace. I sat in the chair near the window. The fire crackled between us, and outside the square was quiet and dark. "Drutch came to your house this morning," he said. It was not a question. I looked up at him. "How do you know that?" He did not answer directly. "Was there trouble?" "I managed," I said. "That is not what I asked." "He came. He made implications. He left." I folded my hands in my lap. Someone had also been inside the house the night before. My father's study was searched. Something moved across his face, controlled, but present. "What were they looking for?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. He moved from the fireplace to the window on the opposite side of the room and stood looking out at the square with his hands behind his back. "Your father," he said slowly, "was not only in debt, Miss Crest." The fire crackled. The clock ticked. "Explain that," I said. He turned from the window. 3 years ago, your father was approached by a man named Drutch with what appeared to be a legitimate investment arrangement. He was not the only one. There were 7 other men, most of them minor landowners like your father, who entered the same arrangement. Within a year, all of them had lost their original investment and found themselves owing considerably more than they had put in. He paused. It was not an investment. It was a mechanism for debt. A very old one, dressed up in new paper. I stared at him. My father was swindled. Systematically, he said, along with 7 others. And the others? I asked. What happened to them? 2 settled quickly and lost their properties. 2 others left London entirely. 1 died. He stopped. The remaining 2 are still trying to find a legal path. And you? I said. Where do you fit in this? He looked at me for a long moment. One of the 7 men was a friend of mine, he said. A good one. He was the one who died. The room was very quiet. So this is not about your sister at all, I said slowly, the shape of things rearranging themselves in my mind. Or rather, it is not only about your sister. My sister is entirely real and entirely in need of a sensible companion, he said. That part is true. But the other part, I said. You bought my father's debt notes to get close to Drutch, to track what he does and who he moves against. He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. I stood up from the chair. You are using my debt as a tool, I said. Not loudly, not with heat. Just clearly, the way one states a fact that needs to be on the table between two people. I am removing your debt, he said. The tool aspect runs in a different direction entirely. What direction? I need Drutch to believe he still has leverage over your household, he said. If he thinks the debt is gone, he goes quiet and we lose our visibility into how he operates. If he believes you are still vulnerable, he continues pressing. And when he presses, he reveals himself. I looked at him across the fire-lit room. You want him to keep coming after me, I said, so you can watch what he does. I want him to believe he is still coming after you, he said. There is a difference. You are in this house now. You are safe here. But the appearance of vulnerability needs to remain. And you did not think to tell me any of this before I agreed to come here? Would you have come? He asked. I said nothing. Would you have trusted me with this information before you had any reason to? He pressed, not unkindly. That was the unbearable part. That he was right. If he had sat across from me in that sitting room this morning and told me all of this, I would have shown him the door and bolted it behind him. I would have chosen pride over sense and been alone in that house tonight with Drutch's card on the desk and no plan and no options. What happens next? I asked. Drutch will make another move within days, he said. When he does, I will be prepared for it. In the meantime, you do exactly what I told the world you are here to do. You accompany Dresswin. You attend her fittings. You go to the morning calls. He paused. And if anyone asks why you are here, the answer is simple. You are Lady Dresswin's companion for the season. And Lady Breckthorne? I said. On Friday. Something passed across his face that might, in another man, have been the beginning of humor. Lady Breckthorne, he said, is the most formidable woman in 3 counties, and she will interrogate you within 10 minutes of arriving. She will ask about your family, your education, your opinions on several things that are none of her business, and the angle of your posture. And what do I say to her? The truth, he said simply. She can smell a performance at 40 paces, and she has no patience for one. I looked at him. One more question, I said. He waited. The night of the Hargrove ball, I said. When you got into that carriage. Was that also planned? The firelight moved across his face. He was quiet for a long moment, and I watched his expression with the careful attention of a woman who had learned that what people chose not to say was frequently more informative than what they did. No, he said at last. Just that one word. Simple and flat, and carrying, somehow, the weight of something considerably larger than a one-word answer. Good night, Miss Crest, he said. Good night, Your Grace, I replied. I walked out of the sitting room and up the stairs to my rooms and sat at the window in the dark, looking out at the bare October trees in the square below, and thought about a man who had purchased my father's debts to avenge a dead friend, who had locked me in a carriage and then unlocked the door without fanfare, who said no and meant something far more complicated than the word itself contained. This was still a dangerous situation. Drutch was still out there. Whatever my father had been caught in was still unresolved. Lady Breckthorne was coming on Friday with her opinions and her 40-pace radar for dishonesty. And I was in the middle of all of it, in a house that smelled faintly of firewood and old books, with a girl who read inheritance law for pleasure, and a duke who looked at me like he was still working out what I was. I had walked into something much larger than a carriage, and the door, this time, was wide open. That was almost worse. Lady Breckthorne arrived on Friday at precisely 10 in the morning. I heard her before I saw her. Her voice carried through the entrance hall and up the staircase like a church bell that had decided it was also in charge of the sermon. She was giving Mrs. Dorval instructions about the placement of her coat. Then she was commenting on the flower arrangement in the hall. Then she was asking, in a voice that required no amplification, where the young woman was. I came down the stairs. She was standing in the center of the entrance hall with her coat already handed off and her eyes already on me before my foot touched the third step from the bottom. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back severely and the posture of a woman who had never once in her life permitted herself the luxury of a slouch. Her eyes were the same dark shade as the Duke's, sharp and unhurried, and taking in everything at once. She looked at me the way a magistrate looks at evidence. "Miss Crest," she said. "Lady Breckthorne," I replied, reaching the bottom of the stairs and meeting her gaze directly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You look like your mother." I stopped. "You knew my mother?" I asked. "Briefly. Years ago." She turned and walked toward the sitting room as though she had lived in this house far longer than I had. "Come. I want tea, and I want to talk to you before my nephew fills your head with whatever version of this situation he has decided to present." I followed her into the sitting room. She sat. I sat. Tea appeared with the efficiency that Mrs. Dorval applied to everything, and Lady Breckthorne looked at me across the low table with the expression of a woman who had decided honesty was less exhausting than ceremony. "He told you about the debt," she said, "and about Drudge." "Yes," I said. "Did he tell you about the trial?" I went very still. "What trial?" I said. She picked up her tea, set it down again, looked at me with something in her expression that was not quite pity, but was adjacent to it. "3 months ago," she said, "Caldvern presented evidence against Drudge to a magistrate. Documented evidence, names, figures, the full structure of the swindle laid out in precise detail." She paused. "The magistrate dismissed it. Every piece." "Why?" I asked. "Because Drudge," she said carefully, "has connections that reach considerably higher than a magistrate's court. Men in positions whose names I will not say in this room because walls in London are thinner than they appear." She folded her hands in her lap. The case was buried. Caldvern was warned, quietly and through unofficial channels, to let the matter rest. "And he did not," I said. "Because I already knew. I could see the shape of it clearly now." "He did not," she confirmed. "He has been building a second case, broader, stronger. One that cannot be dismissed by a single magistrate because it will not go to a single magistrate." She looked at me steadily. "He needs Drudge to act openly, aggressively, on record. He needs witnesses and documented incidents that form a pattern no one can argue away." "He needs Drudge to come after me," I said. "He needs Drudge to come after you visibly," she said. "Yes." I sat with that for a moment. The fire crackled. Outside the square was bright with cold autumn sun. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "He did not." "Because you deserve to know the full ground you are standing on," she said flatly. "My nephew is a good man. He is also a man who has spent 2 years being careful, and careful men sometimes forget that the people around them are not chess pieces that simply hold their positions while the game is played." I looked at her. "You are telling me I have a choice," I said. "I am telling you that you should know you have one," she said. "There is a difference." We drank our tea in silence for a moment. Then she said, "Your mother was a sensible woman. Too sensible, perhaps, for the man she married." "My father was not a bad man," I said quietly. "No," she agreed. "He was a trustworthy one. There is a difference there, too." When the Duke came in 20 minutes later, he found us sitting together in what must have looked like a companionable quiet. He looked between us with the expression of a man who had expected to manage a difficult introduction and had arrived to find it entirely unnecessary. "You have been talking," he said. It was not quite an accusation. "We have been drinking tea," said Lady Breckthorne serenely. He looked at me. I looked back at him and said nothing. That afternoon, everything moved very quickly. A letter arrived for the Duke at 2:30. I was in the library with Dresswin, going over the list of calls they were expected to make the following week, when I heard the Duke's voice from the study across the hall, sharp and controlled in the way that suggested something had gone wrong. I heard another voice too, lower, a man I did not know. Then the Duke appeared in the library doorway. "Miss Crest," he said, "I need a moment." Dresswin looked up from her list with the alert expression of someone who sensed that the interesting part had arrived. "Dresswin," her brother said, without looking at her. "Go practice your introduction with Mrs. Dorval." "I have practiced it 14 times, she said. 15 is a better number, he said. She went, but slowly, with her book, and with the particular deliberateness of someone hoping to hear something before she was fully out of range. The Duke closed the library door and turned to me. "Drutch has filed a formal complaint with the County Records Office," he said. "He has submitted the debt notes with a request to have this address listed as a secondary claim against the Crest estate, which means your name is now attached to a public record that links you to the outstanding debt." I felt the blood leave my face. "He cannot do that. The Dunhollow house is the estate, not this address." "He has done it," he said. "It is procedurally questionable, but it will take time to challenge. Time during which your name appears in a public debt register." He paused. "It will be noticed. People talk." "People already talk," I said. "Lady Portsmouth made certain of that." "This is different," he said. "A public register is a document. It follows you." He looked at me directly. "I am sorry. This was not supposed to happen this quickly. I underestimated how far he was willing to move." I stood up from the chair. Something was rising in my chest, and I needed a moment to identify it clearly before it came out of my mouth as the wrong thing. It was not simply anger, though anger was part of it. It was something older and more tiring, the feeling of being acted upon, of being the surface on which other people's plans left their marks, Drutch's greed, my father's trust, the Duke's careful strategy, all of it landing on me, on my name, on the life I was trying to hold together with increasingly inadequate materials. "You said I was safe here," I said. "You are safe here," he said. "Your person is safe. Your name is another matter, and I did not protect it well enough, and that is my fault." There was something in the way he said it. No deflection, no qualification. Just the plain shape of an admission from a man who did not make them easily. "What happens now?" I said. "I have a meeting tonight," he said, "with 2 men who have been working with me on the second case. After tonight, Drutch will have no further ability to file anything against your name or anyone else's." He stopped. "It will be over before morning." I looked at him for a long moment. "And if something goes wrong tonight?" I asked. He was quiet. "Called Vern," I said. "Nothing will go wrong," he said. "That is what people say when they have not fully considered what wrong looks like," I said. Something shifted in his expression. It was brief and deep, and entirely unguarded, lasting only a second before the careful control came back. But I had seen it. The way a curtain moves in a closed room when someone opens a door in a far part of the house. Just the smallest evidence of air moving somewhere behind the stillness. "Go to dinner with Dresswin," he said quietly. "I will be back by midnight." He left before I could say anything else. I stood in the library alone and looked at the rows of books on their shelves and the dying afternoon light through the window and thought about a man going out into the London night to finish something that had started with the death of a friend. And I thought about how much I did not want anything to go wrong. That feeling sat in my chest all through dinner and all through the evening, warm and persistent, and entirely inconvenient. Dresswin talked all through the meal with bright, sharp energy, covering 3 subjects before the second course arrived. She talked about the calls we would make the following week, about a particularly foolish thing a young lord named Petsworth had said at Lady Grenfall's card evening, about the inheritance law book, and a clause she had found that she considered both unjust and fascinating. She was watching me, too, between sentences, with the careful peripheral attention of someone who was pretending not to notice things while noticing everything. "He will be fine," she said, between the second and third course, without preamble. I looked at her. "I was not," I began. "You have checked the clock 4 times since we sat down," she said pleasantly. "And you have eaten approximately nothing." I looked at my plate. "He is very good at what he does," she said, more quietly now, the brightness dropping slightly from her voice to reveal something more genuine underneath. "He has been doing this for 2 years, planning and waiting and being careful." She paused. "He is also the most stubborn person I have ever known, which in this case is more useful than it sounds." "He told me he would be back by midnight," I said. "Then he will be back by midnight," she said simply. "He does not say things he does not mean?" I thought about that, about all the things he had said, and all the things he had not said, and the one word, "no," that had carried the weight of something much larger in the firelit sitting room on my first night in this house. "Dresswin," I said. "Yes?" "What was his friend like? The one who died?" She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "His name was Fenwick Holt," she said. "He was 32. He had a wife and a daughter who was 4 years old. He was the kind of man who laughed easily and argued about everything and never once said a cruel word about anyone." She looked at her plate. "He died in debt, with his name in a register, and his daughter grew up in a house that had to be sold." She paused. "Caldvern has been paying for that daughter's education quietly since she was 5. He has never mentioned it to anyone. I only know because I found the correspondence by accident." The room was very quiet. "He is a good man," I said softly. "He is a very complicated one," she said. "But yes." The clock struck 11. I looked at the door. He came back at 11:30. I heard the front door and was on my feet before I had decided to stand. Dresswin, who had fallen asleep in the armchair with her inheritance law book open on her chest, did not stir. I moved to the sitting room door and opened it quietly. The Duke was in the entrance hall, his coat dark with the cold of the night, speaking in a low voice to the man who had come with him, a sharp-faced solicitor named Mr. Brackwell, whom I had seen twice before in the house. There was another man behind them both, older, with the bearing of someone official, carrying a leather document case under his arm. The Duke looked up when I appeared in the doorway. His eyes moved over my face quickly, checking something, the way a person checks a room after a storm to see what is still standing. "It is done," he said. I let out a breath I had been holding since 2:30 that afternoon. "All of it?" I said. "All of it," he said. "Drutch was arrested this evening at his offices on Cavendish Street. The documents are signed. The case goes before a senior court in 3 weeks with 7 complainants, full financial records, and 3 witnesses whose testimonies cannot be suppressed." He paused. "It is over." Mr. Brackwell excused himself with a brief bow. The official gentleman followed. The door closed behind them. And then, it was just the 2 of us in the entrance hall, the candles burning low around us, the house quiet above and below, and the fire in the adjoining room painting everything amber and warm. "Your father's debt notes," he said. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. He held it out to me. Both the notes I purchased and the one Drutch held. Brackwell recovered it as part of the arrest documentation. I took it from him, unfolded it, looked at the figures written there in my father's creditor's hands, numbers that had lived in the back of my mind like a second heartbeat for 2 years. He said, "Turn it over." I turned it over. On the reverse, in his precise and unhurried handwriting, was a single word: "Cancelled." My throat tightened in a way I had not given it permission to. "It is done," he said again, more quietly this time. "You owe nothing. Not to Drutch. Not to anyone." I folded the paper, held it against my chest for a moment. Breathed. "The house on Dunhollow Lane is yours again," he said. "Uncontested. Mrs. Petch will be notified in the morning." I looked up at him. He was watching me with that careful, unhurried attention, the same way he had watched me across a dark carriage on the night of the Hargrove ball, the night that had started all of this, which felt simultaneously like a week ago and like another life entirely. "I do not know how to thank you," I said, and I meant it plainly, without performance. "You do not need to," he said. "You spent 2 years on this," I said. "You purchased my father's debts and brought me into this house and used a dead friend's memory as the engine for all of it." I paused. I am not saying that with bitterness. I am saying it because it is the truth, and you deserve to have the truth acknowledged. He was very still. "Fenwick Holt deserved better than what happened to him," he said. "So did your father. So did the others." "Yes," I said. "They did." A silence settled between us, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that exists when two people have said something real and are letting it stand in the room properly before moving past it. Then Dresswind's voice floated through from the sitting room, sleepy and entirely unashamed of herself. "Is it finished?" she called. "Go to sleep, Dresswind," the Duke said. "I was asleep," she said. "I merely woke up to ask." A sound escaped me before I could stop it. Not quite a laugh. Something close to one. The Duke looked at me when it happened. Something changed in his expression, quietly and completely, the way a lock releases when the right key finally turns. "Miss Crest," he said. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment, and this was a different kind of quiet from all the others, not choosing words carefully, not calculating what to say first. This was the quiet of a man standing at the edge of something and looking down. "I owe you an apology," he said. I waited. "The night of the Hargrove ball," he said. "I locked you in a carriage without your consent and gave you no real choice about where you were taken. I told myself it was for your safety, and that was true. But it was not the only reason." He paused. "I had seen you walk out of that ballroom and I did not want to lose sight of you." The candle near the window sputtered slightly in a draft. "That was presumptuous of me," he said, "and I am sorry for it." I looked at him for a long, steady moment. "You are apologizing for the locked door," I said. "I am," he said. "And the smirk?" I said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "That I am less sorry for." There it was again. That maddening, devastating, entirely unfair expression that had started all of this in a swaying carriage on a cold London night. "Called Vern," I said, and I used his name without title for the first time, and I watched him notice it. "Yes," he said. "Why did you not want to lose sight of me?" He was quiet. The fire in the next room crackled. Dresswin, to her credit, made no sound at all, which told me she was very much awake and listening with great concentration. "Because," he said, in a room full of people who had just watched a young woman's dignity attacked in public, You were the only one who walked out with yours entirely intact. And I thought, that is either the bravest person in this room or the most stubborn. And I very much wanted to find out which. And have you, I said, found out which? Both, he said, conclusively. I looked down at the folded paper in my hands. Cancelled. A single word that had taken 2 years and a carriage door and a dead friend and a November morning and a smirk I would probably never fully forgive him for to arrive at. I will be leaving soon, I said. If the season ends and Dresswin's introduction goes well, our arrangement concludes. Yes, he said. That was the agreement. And you intend to honor it. I always honor what I say, he said. I know, I said, which is why what you say next matters rather a lot. He looked at me, directly, fully, with nothing held back in his expression for the first time since I had known him. Miss Crest, he said. Adeline. My name in his voice was an entirely different thing from my name in anyone else's. I would like to ask your permission, he said, to court you, properly, with full transparency, no locked doors and no arrangements that serve any purpose other than the honest one. The entrance hall was very quiet. That is a considerable change of approach, I said. It is, he agreed. I find I am capable of learning. And Dresswin? I said. She still needs a companion for the season. Dresswin, he said, needs someone who treats her like a person with a mind rather than a social obligation to be managed. She has that in you. Whether you are here as a paid companion or as something else entirely is a distinction that affects my feelings considerably more than it affects hers. From the sitting room came a sound that was unmistakably Dresswin failing to fully suppress her reaction to this statement. Dresswin, the Duke said, without raising his voice. I am asleep, she said immediately. I looked at him. He looked at me. And this time the thing at the corner of his mouth was not a smirk. It was something warmer and less controlled, and far more dangerous to my continued composure. You called yourself the most stubborn person she knows, I said. She was being generous, he said. I am also stubborn, I said. You should know that. I do know that, he said. I have known it since the night you stood in a carriage rattling through London at midnight and told me exactly what you thought of locked doors and men who gave instructions to their drivers. He paused. I found it remarkable then. I find it more so now. I looked at the paper in my hands. Then I looked at him. You may court me, I said, properly, with full transparency. Yes, he said. And the smirk, I added, you will endeavor to deploy it less frequently. I will endeavor, he said gravely, to deploy it only when the situation genuinely calls for it. Which in your estimation, I said, is most situations. Most, he agreed. I shook my head, and the sound that escaped me this time was fully a laugh, real and unguarded, filling the quiet entrance hall and going up the stairs and probably reaching every corner of the house, including the sitting room where Dresswin was very certainly not asleep. He smiled. 3 days later, Lady Breckthorne came to call again and found us in the library, the Duke reading at the desk and myself across from him with Dresswin between us, arguing about the inheritance clause she had found, all three of us talking at once with the natural disorder of people who have stopped being careful around each other. Lady Breckthorne stood in the doorway for a moment before anyone noticed her. When she finally spoke, she addressed the Duke. Well, she said simply, it took you long enough. He looked up from his book, then at me, then back at his aunt. Tea, Lady Breckthorne? He said. She came fully into the room and sat in the best chair by the fire with the satisfaction of a woman whose opinions had once again proven correct. Tea, she said, and perhaps some of those biscuits Mrs. Dorval makes. The good ones. A month later, on a cold December morning with frost on the square's bare trees and a fire burning in every room of Caldvern House, the Duke of Caldvern asked me to marry him. He did not do it in a ballroom. He did not do it in front of 300 people or with any performance attached. He did it in the library, standing beside the window where the winter light came in pale and clean, with no one present but the two of them and the rows of books and the quiet. He said, "I do not want a companion for this season, Adeline. I want a partner for everything after it." And I said yes. Not because my name was in a debt register and I had no other choice, not because I was grateful or frightened or out of options, but because he had looked at me walking out of a ballroom at my lowest point and seen something worth keeping. Because he had said no one stood beside me and meant it as a wound he intended to correct. And somewhere across London, on Dunhollow Lane, in a warm house with every window properly locked, Mrs. Petch sat in her chair by the kitchen door with a letter in her lap and a smile on her face, and her cap, for once, perfectly straight.